This whole thing was about, can Batman be broken? You can't break Batman by hurting him. He's been hurt in every way possible. You can't break Batman by killing a Robin, because that happens to him every Friday. So how do you break Batman?
Poor Robin.
Welcome back to the channel. This is Wes, and today my good friend Josh is returning. We've done some in-depth character studies. We talked about some universes, some restarts in the DC continuity. But today you wanted to talk about something a little different. You wanted to talk about an issue that you think is plaguing comics today. Is that right?
Yeah, this is going to get a little heated. It's something I'm pretty passionate about, and honestly, being involved in the studies that I am at school has really opened my mind up to this, and it's definitely made it something that I feel is an important issue that is plaguing comic books today.
One of the things that I think is important is when you're talking about these established characters that have all this history. You're no longer working a writer when you're put on the property. You're not working with your own creation. You're working with a legacy. You're working with someone else's creation, someone else's toys. And I think it's important that you remain true to the spirit of the creation and what the original creators had in mind. So I think when I'll give an example here of something we don't know how it's going to go, but when they announced, James Tynion did his mission statement for his take on Batman. He said that Bruce and Selena Kyle were going to embrace the new young money in Gotham, and they were going to help try and use that to help rebuild the city. That kind of feels inauthentic to the character to me, but we haven't seen it play out yet. That could be interesting.
You're absolutely right. Your initial statement of what you said definitely is what we're getting at here. It's that when you're working with characters who have been in publication, who have been around for 50 plus years, 40 plus years, you're not working with your own creation anymore. You're working with someone else's creation, just like the people before you worked on it. It's like playing with a new toy, and I think you might have used the word playing with the toy or something. It's like playing with a toy. You can play with the toy, you can make it do all sorts of different things, you can put it in different poses, whatever, but don't break the toy. It's possible to break these molds and break these characterizations, and break these formulas and conventions that these characters have been in for decades upon decades. And when that happens, you run into a bunch of problems. One thing that not a lot of people realize with these characters, and I've seen it in your comment section before with people, and not just your comment section, I've seen it all over the place, Twitter, other YouTube video comment sections, etc. People lambasting comic book fans like me and yourself because they say that we're not open to change, we don't want to accept anything new. And my response to that is, yeah, that's kind of it, because anything that's brought into these characters nowadays, Superman, Batman both just celebrated their 80th anniversaries, over the last 2 years. When you bring something drastically new to these characters, you're probably going to break the toy. And when you break the toy, a lot of problems come out. You alienate fans who have been involved with those characters and those products for decades. This kind of makes me think of Pele's dad, about how he read Superman from like 1963 all the way up till now, and Bendis was finally the one who broke it. He broke the toy. You can't play with the Superman toy anymore. A lot of people don't realize that these characters, they're cultural touchstones for multiple generations. My dad read Superman comics when he was a kid and throughout his teenage years. That's a cultural touchstone that passes between, two different generations. It passes between my father and it's passed on to me. My grandpa, he read comic books too when he was a little older by then, but he read comic books in his heyday too. It's something that, these characters are written to exemplify these particular values, these particular behaviors, particular personalities and characteristics. And you really can't deviate too far from them, because it's just going to alienate all of your readers and all of your fans who have certain expectations of these characters.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Marvel here, just to give three stark examples, and we're not going to get too in depth on this because you're going to talk a little bit more on DC. But when you look at Marvel and some of the things that they've done, you had Spider-Man One More Day, where basically Spider-Man makes a deal with the devil so he can have more time. He makes a deal with this devil to lose his relationship with Mary Jane so he can have more time with Aunt May. It didn't feel authentic to the readers. First of all, Spider-Man wouldn't make a deal with the devil, and he certainly wouldn't trade away the love of his life, to prolong the life of someone who's had such a fulfilled and long life. Then you have Iceman. All of a sudden, he's basically mind fixed into all of a sudden he's a gay character.
Yep.
Well, that's a very stark change. Where in the history are there seeds of this where it's just now manifesting? Well, it doesn't make sense because it never felt authentic to the character, and it drove people away, and it alienates readers and makes them angry. They don't react well to this. And then the third big one would be the day that Captain America came out and said "Hail Hydra" and basically came out as a Nazi. Yep. Mm-hmm. Nothing in his history suggests that he was a Nazi sleeper agent for 50 years. So then they're like, well, how can you react like this? This is a good change. It's like, no, it's not a good change. That's not the character. You're writing something else now.
Yep.
And then the creators or the publishers want to bag on fans and say that fans are toxic or that we're just man babies because I've invested maybe 20 years into a character and then all of a sudden you just decided that he's a Nazi now. Or I've invested 20 years in this character and all of a sudden he's gay. There's nothing wrong with being gay, but Bobby Drake isn't gay. That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with Peter Parker, wanting more time with his aunt, but him making a deal with the devil and giving up the love of his life or one of the loves of his life, Gwen Stacy. Mm-hmm. It's not authentic to the character, and then people react, and then they're basically blamed for being toxic and things like this. And it's very frustrating as a fan that people will come after you that way when you have an honest emotional reaction after you've invested in the characters.
It's almost like fans are being lambasted and blamed for being invested in these characters. It's almost like people who didn't like the Captain America Hydra thing or the Peter Parker, no longer being with Mary Jane thing, especially the Iceman thing. That was a big deal. It's almost like you're being mocked or insulted because you've invested 20, 30 years in being a fan of this character. The Superman that I grew up with and the Superman that I know is the one from the DC animated universe, from Superman the Animated Series, the New Batman Adventures, and Justice League. So that's the Superman that I grew up with. That was a Superman that was 100% on point, 100% within his core values, his core characterizations. It makes him exactly who Superman's supposed to be. And for the longest time, that's who he's been in the comic books. When you take that character and you start bending things and you start changing things and you change his personality, you change his behavior, the way he behaves, his values, it breaks that characterization and it alienates the people who have invested their time and their lives, parts of their lives. Whether you want to say that or not, that's the case. We've all invested parts of our lives into these characters. You break it and you alienate those fans. And it's not that the fans are being toxic. It's not that we're being man babies. We're just saying, where did it go? Why did you just take 20, 30, 40 years of investment that I myself and these other fans have had, not just our time, our money, and you just completely got rid of it. You tossed it. It's not that fans are unwilling to accept change. It's that the change is usually so drastic that you're looking at something that's nearly unrecognizable at this point.
It's interesting when you say, whether or not fans are willing to accept change. So there was a recent change. It was an enormous change to Superman. There's, in classic, DC lore, like Lois and Clark can't have a baby, because they can't conceive. So I think it was Jurgens came up with a way where basically Superman was depowered. They were on a different planet and they were able to conceive John, and he became a father, which is something almost inconceivable in DC lore. It hasn't really happened. And then they put it in there and it enhanced the character. Everyone embraced the change. So they said, that is a good change because I want to see Superman be a father. I like that you were able to do that. Now bring him back to where he was with this substantial change that elevates the character, makes him more relatable, that fleshes him out and makes him more whole. It's when they start ripping the flesh off of the character, I think, is when the fans have the backlash.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the key part of that, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I never really thought of that being, what it was. It just felt natural to me. It didn't even really feel like a change, but that's an enormous change for the Superman character. You're absolutely right. That's a really good point. But the whole point of that stems back to Superman acting within his norms. Like, he didn't become a deadbeat dad. He didn't reject John. He didn't, mistreat John. He didn't choose the Superman identity over John or Lois. Like, he worked. He embraced it. He made it work. He treated him like, it was a perfect father-son relationship. Like, he'd call him, Jono, and, he'd like joke around with him, and he was just a great father to him. And he embraced the role of being a good father. And Lois embraced the role of being mother, and Clark embraced the role of being Lois's husband. It was a whole embraced family role. It was everyone just working with, it was within their established characters. That's the whole point. Their reactions to these changes and the behaviors that they exhibited after those big changes came in, which was John, Lois and Clark acted within their normal behaviors. They acted within their normal characteristics. It didn't change them and make them unrecognizable as characters.
So now, we will talk about some of the more recent changes to where, there's been backlash against Brian Michael Bendis and the changes that he had, because we have all of these things that Superman is exhibited as a father, as a husband. All of a sudden Jor-El shows up in Bendis' Superman, says, I'm going to take your son. We're going to go into space. He needs to become a man. Well, the last time we saw Jor-El, he was Oz, and he was this enormous supervillain, and Superman would never let him go into space with his insane father. And then his wife says, well, I'm going to go with him because I need the story. Well, Lois certainly wouldn't go along with it either. She would die before she would let that happen. So now we're going against the character norms and within the traits of everything that's been established. And you start breaking the characters, and then you start aging up John, and you make you make it look like Lois is cheating on Clark, but he's accepting it. So he's kind of being cuckolded. And all of a sudden fans start reacting, but we're man babies and we're toxic because Brian Michael Bendis doesn't understand the confines in which Superman can operate.
Yes, 100%. Yes. When I first read through Bendis' Man of Steel miniseries, I think it was about issue 4. I liked the first 3. Then issue 4 hit, and I knew that he was returning to his old ways, and that this was going to become a problem. Because exactly what you said happened. Jor-El shows up and says, I'm going to take John into space. He needs to learn about his Kryptonian heritage, and he needs to become a man and stuff. He needs to see the galaxy. Superman, if he was behaving within his, established behavioral norms, and if he was acting like the character he has always been, Superman would have said to Lois and John, you need to get out of here. And he would have turned around and looked at Jor-El and said, if you lay one hand on my son, I will end you. This is not going to go the way that you want it to. You need to leave. Even if John protested and said, no, I want to go with him, there is no way Clark would have allowed him to go. Clark would have said, no, you're not going. I'm saying you're not going, and that's final. Same with Lois. Lois would not have let John go. Both Clark and Lois would have rather have died than allow that to happen, especially with what happened with the Oz effect with Jor-El. Clark knew Jor-El was out of his mind insane. He just cleaned up his messes in the Oz effect. None of it was within the way that these characters have acted for decades. And especially, none of it was within how they acted within Peter Tomasi's 45-issue run on Superman. John would not have been acting the way he was. Clark did not act the way he should have acted. And Lois did not act the way she should have acted. And when I say should have acted, that's not within my expectations. That is within the established conventions and writing methods of these characters that have been built over decades and decades of work by other artists and other writers. That's not what I want. That's what it should be based on the work that countless other people have done on the characters. People like Dan Jurgens, John Byrne, um, going all the way back to Siegel and Schuster with Superman. Those are characteristics that have been part of Superman's structure for 70, 80 years. That's what I'm talking about, how he should be behaving. It's not how I want him to. That doesn't matter. It's how he should be behaving according to those characteristics that have been set up for years.
And it's weird, there's like a segment of the fandom or the readership that I think they like chaos. They like for these weird big shakeups to come in because they know it's going to emotionally impact people. They like to come in and troll you and be like, "Oh, you just don't get the story. You don't understand what Bendis is doing. He's elevating the characters." Like, no, I get what he's doing. That's why I'm upset.
Exactly.
You're just trying to get my goat by telling me that I'm too stupid to see to understand what I'm reading, and it ends up causing these huge frictions. And then there's collisions within the fandom and everything's like, oh, there's this big schism. Well, it's your fault. You're the ones that okayed him to write, or Bendis to write the story. Your editors okayed it. Didio and Lee obviously approved it. And then you're like, well, I can't. Why is this happening? It feels like it's because you're incompetent.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of the problems that stems with fandom with that kind of stuff, with people saying you don't understand this, you're just not getting the writing. I've noticed through a lot of research and just talking, to different types of fans in general about stuff like this. A lot of the fans who say stuff like that, they're not even really necessarily true fans. They don't actually read all of the work. A lot of the people who come out and say, "Oh, I'm enjoying Bendis's work on Superman," and they compliment it, they're actually just complimenting Bendis. They don't actually read his Superman work. Or they might skim through it, or they might pick up like issue 14, miss 15 and 16, they'll pick up 17 or something like that. But even for the people who are diehards that read every issue, they're inexperienced as far as the history of the character. They haven't gone back and reread and read, Superman from earlier eras. They haven't gone back to read Superman by Geoff Johns with Superman and Legion of Superheroes, Superman Up, Up, and Away. They haven't gone back to read John Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries from the late 80s. That was his Crisis on Infinite Earths reboot. They haven't gone back to do that kind of research on the character and see how the character was written in the past. And sometimes that makes for a genuine conflict because they only understand how the character is written now. They don't understand that people have read this character before and that the characterization was completely different.
So, Josh, I think this is going to end the first segment, as it always goes. These always go a little bit long, but there's a little bit more, a lot more we want to talk about. So you want to join me tomorrow and we'll finish this up?
Yeah, that sounds good. I have quite a bit more. I could talk about this subject for hours, but I have quite a bit more I'd like to talk about.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.